So what happens when you never check the oil level on your mower? It's not a big deal, right? If you take the mower out of the garage or shed and see a big puddle of oil, you check it, right? Or if you saw smoke coming from the engine, you check it then, wouldn't you? But what if I told you you might be surprised by the answer to this question? Believe it or not, a lot of people answer this question with, I never check my oil, and the reason why they don't is quite chilling. In today's video, we're going to look at this Craftsman branded lawnmower, and the problem is that it won't start. Now, according to the ad, it was ran without oil and it's broken, and the only thing it's good for is apparently just parts. Now, there's nothing wrong with a practically brand new mower being used for parts, but can I really trust someone who tells me it's broken if they're unwilling to do the most basic thing ever, which is to check the oil level? So I'd like to find out for myself if it's really broken or if they might be mistaken. Now, I'm going to try and repair this mower, but yours might be a little different, so this might not work on yours. So if things are not working out for you, like in the video, please ask about it. I'll be glad to answer your questions. The worst part about this whole ordeal was that when I saw the ad, I didn't even read the entire description. You see, when trying to pick up free items, timing is everything, and when looking at free ads, I just pick out the important parts. So I saw a red mower with the bag next to the mailbox and then the address. And to be honest, whatever the rest of the ad says is not important. The reason is the description will typically say something about it being a mower that won't start and will never tell anything crucial about it. Well, this time it got me, but to be honest, it wouldn't have stopped me from picking up hundreds of dollars in free parts. As you can see, when pulling on the rope, there doesn't seem to be the typical sort of resistance you would normally get from a mower that wasn't broken. There is some resistance, but it's surprising how little there is. The next item is to put some fuel into the carb's throat and then try starting it. So unfortunately, it didn't even try and start, which is a really good sign that the previous owner might be correct about the engine being broken. So from the information I've gotten so far, I think I have a good idea what's wrong with this engine, and it's not good. So when these engines break, what typically happens is that the connecting rod between the piston and the crank will break. The other thing that can happen is, depending upon how it breaks, the connecting rod could break the engine block as well. Now it depends on the conditions on how it breaks, but either way, it's not good. After getting the spark plug out of the engine and putting a screwdriver into the opening, I can feel the top of the piston, and while slowly spinning the blade, I should be able to feel the piston moving back and forth in the engine, but as you can see, it's not doing that at all. My screwdriver is staying in place. Now, at this point, the game is over. There's simply nothing else we can do to get it to work if it's broken, right? Well, not just yet. So the next step I want to take is to take the engine apart and see just how bad it really is, or if it's something that I can fix for very little money. Besides, I've always wanted to see if I can make a connecting rod out of JB Weld. But why waste all that time taking it apart? Well, there are a few good reasons. The first one is out of sheer morbid curiosity. I mean, it's already broken. How much worse can it get? The other one is a bit more particular. When recycling metal, they have to sort it into ferrous and non-ferrous metals. Basically stuff that's magnetic and stuff that's not. If you try to recycle an entire engine, there's going to be a mix of both, so unfortunately they give you a lower price for it. But if you have the time to separate it, you'll get a higher price per pound. Just be careful you don't spend too much time doing it, otherwise you'll never get your money out of it. Also, if you need to find parts for your mower, finding a sticker like this one on the mower would be helpful, but if you need to find parts for the engine, this sticker would be a lot better. If you need help, take pictures of all the stickers you can find and take them to your local small engine repair shop if you're lucky to have one of those around. While I have the engine off the mowing deck, I'm going to clean the stuff I couldn't get to when I cleaned it the first time. You obviously don't need to do this, but I've got it this clean, so cleaning it a little bit more won't hurt. After looking at the condition of the paint on top and under the mowing deck, you can see that it wasn't used all that much before it broke, which is just a real shame. So if you saw the video before this one, when I first got it, it looked terrible. It had grass clippings all over it, and the clippings didn't look right. The reason was because the engine had an oil leak and the clippings were helping to hide that fact. This mower is the best example of why you should blow off the clippings after each and every use. One of the best items I can salvage from this mower is the gasoline I pulled from the tank. It's not a lot, but in today's economy, if it's the same color as gold, it's probably priced the same way. Of course, gasoline isn't supposed to be this color, so if I had to guess, I'd say this fuel was at least a year old. So more than likely this mower broke last year and they kept it around until someone could diagnose it. I'm also draining all the fluids from this engine, that way I don't spill something I wasn't planning to. We'll check the oil here in a little bit, but until then, I'll keep taking the smaller parts off the engine so we can take the engine apart. Now, I'm not going to take it completely apart, and for good reason. I'm not going to take the time to go any further than I need to. Right now, I'm going to work to take the sump off the engine so we can take a look at the internals, then we'll see how bad it really is and then decide on what to do next. Now, there are other ways to take off a stuck blade adapter, but using a puller is the safer way. Now, this one isn't that badly stuck to the crankshaft, but if you were to beat on it with a hammer, you risk damaging the blade adapter or the crankshaft. So a very likely suspect when it comes to a serious oil leak would be a bad crank seal, but after looking at this one, I don't see any signs of leakage. While I'm here, I'm also going to clean this part of the engine of any loose grass clippings or clumps of dirt. Now, the house I picked this one up from had really nice grass, and although it was wintertime when I picked it up, I could tell they took really good care of their lawn. Too bad it didn't extend to their equipment. So it's finally time for me to dump what little oil is left in the engine, and surprisingly, even though the oil dipstick didn't have a drop on it, it appears that the stick doesn't extend all the way down to the bottom of the engine. Now, this was done on purpose, and the reasoning is that if the stick did go down to the bottom and you pulled it out to check the oil level and saw a spot of oil on it, and even though it wasn't anywhere near where it needs to be, you would think, hey, there's some oil on it, even though there wasn't enough. So instead, they kept the bottom of the stick from extending too far into the oil. That way, when you pulled it out and saw nothing on it, you would then say, oh no, there's no oil in it, and then you would add more. Unfortunately, that works for the most part if you even bother checking the oil, but if you're the type to not bother, then it's not going to help anyone, especially the engine. After using some finesse to remove the sump, I do see some metal bits clinging to it, so that's not a good sign already. You can also see that Briggs uses a paper gasket to seal the sump. Now, this might be a contentious issue later on in the video. And it would also seem that the previous owner of this mower was correct in saying that it was badly broken and only good for parts. You can see what's left of the connecting rod sitting inside the engine. I'll get all these pieces out of the engine, that way we can see how it broke. Now, if the only thing that's broken is the connecting rod, then we might be able to just replace it and keep using it. However, from the way this rod broke, there's a good chance there might be more we need to replace. So I put the rod back together the best I can, and as you can see, there are at least 6 breaks in it. Now, this type of break only happens when there's very little oil in the engine, leading to excessive heat buildup, and eventually the rod is going to fail and break in multiple places. And unfortunately, it looks like the damage might have extended to part of the piston as well. Now, to get a better look at it, we'll need to get the piston out of the block, but that's going to take a few more steps before we can do that. Now, since I know this engine has been overheated because of the lack of oil, I do want to inspect the journal on the crank and make sure it's not too severely damaged or has metal on it from the connecting rods still on it. Fortunately, I don't feel any sort of serious damage to it, and if there was, we'd have to get the crank out and see if we can remove the metal that shouldn't be there. Now, initially, I was planning on taking off the flywheel so we could take the crankshaft out of the engine, but since we know the journal is in decent shape, I'm not going to go that far. Now, we do need to take the cylinder head off the engine to remove the piston, so getting the plastic cover and recoil off the engine will help out somewhat. Now, there are other ways to do this, but I'm choosing to do it this way, and one of the biggest reasons why is because I can keep the carb, intake, and muffler connected to it. That way, there's less of a chance of losing stuff. Now, I don't normally take engines apart on a daily basis, so I sometimes forget what can stay in the engine and what has to come off. In this case, one of the push rods and even a tappet fell out while I was handling it, so please be careful if you're going to do this kind of repair. Eventually, the camshaft even fell out, and unfortunately, it looks as though it received some damage as well from when the rod came apart, but the damage seems to be on part of the plastic that doesn't make contact with the tappet. However, I wish I had inspected it just a bit closer, otherwise I would have noticed that this is going to cause some serious issues later on. After getting the valve cover off the engine, I should have taken a closer look, otherwise I would have realized this might have been a potential area for an oil leak. The reason I say that is because this gasket is rather soft and sort of misshapen, but it won't be an issue, at least not yet. However, this is going to be a real pain later on. Also, when looking at the footage, you can also see both round valve caps sitting on top of the valve retainers. Do yourself a favor and remove them and put them in a safe place. The reason I say this is because later on I noticed one of them missing, so I wish I would have taken them off beforehand. Now, at this point, we can now safely remove the 4 head bolts and expose the piston. Just be careful because there's one more thing still connected to the carb, which is the governor linkage. So once the head is off the engine, we'll have to swing the carb to disengage the linkage. It is a bit awkward to do, but just be careful and take your time. So here's what the combustion chamber looks like on the head. You can see the 2 round valves and the opening for the spark plug. Now, on a car, when the rod breaks, you typically have cylinder head damage and possibly valve damage as well, but since this is a small engine, there's less of a chance of having that sort of damage. So here's the top of the piston, and it's got a fair amount of carbon buildup on it along with the head, so we might have to do some cleaning later on. Now at this point, just carefully push the piston out of the block, and then we'll see just how bad the piston really is. Now, there are no special tools needed to take out the piston, just try not to use anything metallic to push on it. If you need to use something, try using something made out of hard plastic so you don't damage the cylinder wall. After a few tense moments, I finally got it out, and man, it's not good. So the first thing I see is that the skirt on the piston is kind of damaged from the lack of oil. Now it's not terrible, but I would have to polish it out. Now there's no damage on top of the piston, so that means it didn't make contact with the head or the valves, but it's what I see on the other side of the piston that has me worried. Once we get to the bottom of the piston, we see that the crankshaft has made contact with it. I'm of course talking about the areas on the piston that's shiny while the rest of it is a darker color. If I put a straight edge across these areas and measure it, there are several thousandths of an inch of metal missing. Now I'm not sure how much of an impact this missing metal is going to be, but I don't think it's a good idea to reuse it. Now the cylinder wall looks to be in pretty good shape, however I am worried about a few areas, so I might have to use a cylinder hone to try to give the new rings a chance to seat, but I might be getting ahead of myself. So here's what I see. I see a severely damaged engine resulting in not just a broken rod, but a shattered rod. I also see piston and crankshaft contact and also some damage on the camshaft. The last part is some light scoring on the cylinder walls, but it could have been a lot worse. All because there was an oil leak and the previous owner wasn't paying attention to it and didn't check it. If they had checked it even at the beginning of the season, this might have been prevented. So here's the best part. This mower is priced just shy of $500. I don't know about you, but that's a pretty good investment and well worth my time and effort to make sure it stays running for at least a handful of years, not a couple of years. Yet again, they might be swimming in a pool of money in the backyard, so for them, $500 may not mean anything but another charge on their credit card. It's simply amazing how some people view money, and it's quite sad to be honest. Now for this pile of parts, there's well over $200 in value here I got for free. From a flywheel, engine block, cylinder head, carb, and even a fuel tank, not to mention everything else. I could easily make a good chunk of change from this little bit of work, so now the real question is, what to do? I've got two options right now, sell the parts or rebuild the engine. Selling it wouldn't be any fun, and that's not what this channel is about. I guess I could rebuild the engine, but the cost for a new piston, rod, camshaft, and gasket kit would be well over $100, not including taxes and shipping. So it's either make $200 by selling the parts online or spend over $100 and have a $250 mower. Sometimes I wish I had taken accounting or financing instead of engineering in college. So my question is, should I buy the parts to fix this almost brand new mower, or should I take a different route of selling the parts that I already have? Now this is a tough one for me, but I do have another way to get around the cost for parts, but I won't spoil it for you just yet, and if you've been paying attention, I think some of you might already know the answer. Thank you for watching. I really do appreciate your time here. Please feel free to ask me any questions about this project or about your own projects, and I hope to see you in the next video.